Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Today, our guest is Peter Kozodoy. Peter is an Inc. 5000 serial entrepreneur, TEDx speaker, and author of the new book, Honest to Greatness: How Today's Greatest Leaders Use Brutal Honesty to Achieve Massive Success. Peter's articles on leadership and entrepreneurship have appeared in Forbes, Inc., HuffPost, PR Daily, and more. And I also happen to know that Peter knows a thing or two about figure skating. Peter, welcome to the show.
It's wonderful to be here. And that's true. That's where my origin story is, on ice.
All right. Well, give us the origin story. You are on ice, and then what happens?
Yeah, the quick is I'm a failed former figure skater. Knew by, in my teens, I was going to the Olympics, and also had my sights set on Harvard. Neither one of those things panned out. And so I took my two big chips on my shoulder that I developed from those things and built a company in my 20s. Started at the bottom like everyone else, making commercials for local car dealers, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds, which is not at all. And eventually, through many pivots and getting a lot smarter and wiser about business and leadership and success, built that company into a multi-million-dollar Inc. 5000 marketing agency. We had offices in the US and Canada. And then I've taken that and spun out into all kinds of other stuff, keynotes, books, coaching, a tech startup, real estate. I like having my fingers in a lot of pies. I have entrepreneurial ADHD, which I think is a thing, but has not been named by the Psychiatric Institute, but it's coming.
It is coming. I think I have that thing too. And I think about every entrepreneur that I know has that thing too. Maybe we can just put a name on it ourselves. What's stopping us?
That's it.
So did you always think of yourself as a writer, or where did this idea start that, hey, I could write a book?
Yeah, actually, yes, I did. I went to an amazing private school for high school outside of Boston called Milton Academy. And they had an intensive English program. We were writing 10, 12 page, biopsies of novels in 7th and 8th grade, right? So that at the time absolutely sucked. It was awful. And then by the time I got to college, I was like, wait, this is, I can crank these things out. So what are we doing here? And so I learned that all that ass kicking early on was really, really good, because it's shocking, Josh, how many people can't write. They can't structure a story. They can't structure sentences and paragraphs in a way that makes sense. They don't have mastery of the language. And if I could pin down one skill that has allowed me to be a successful entrepreneur, I truly believe it has been my ability to write.
I love that you're saying that. I'm helping a professor at Harvard Business School right now. I didn't get in either. I got rejected as well. Yeah. So I'm helping a professor though, and my in is writing, because here's this professor and he's like, I need help with a case study. Yeah. And I'm like, well, I'm not a professor. I'm not a researcher. I don't know what this case study is about. What do you need help with? And he's like, well, you know how to write, right? And I was like, yeah, I can write stuff. And he's like, great. Well, that's what I need, because I don't know how to write. And I was like,
such a skill.
Yes, there's my in.
Yeah.
When did the idea for Honest to Greatness come to you? And what was the main motivation? What was the inspiration?
Okay. So like all good pursuits in life, the motivation and inspiration was pure ego. I turned 30. By then I had built a $1 million company and was growing. But I was just not happy with everything I had achieved. I knew there was a lot more. I've always had, a love of writing, and I see myself as a writer. I see myself as an author, right? And I do a lot of this work with entrepreneurs now that I coach. It's you got to put yourself into honest alignment with who you really are and what you really want. Otherwise, you're out of alignment, just like your car is out of alignment, and it hurts to roll down the street. And that's a big message of the book, and honesty, of course, which we can get into a little later. But I realized in myself that here I am an author to my core. Well, where's my book, right? An author needs a book. So I sat down to write a book, and I actually sat down to write a marketing book, because that's my background. And I was very passionate about all of the stupid mistakes that some of my clients had made, businesses I had studied had made. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I sat down to write what I thought was a marketing book, queried 400 literary agents in the business space. Most of them, of course, didn't get back to me. Many of them did get back to me and said, Peter, this is the worst email pitch I've ever seen. You're never going to be a writer. Please never email me again. You will never get picked up. 3 of them took a meeting and one of them signed me. And as soon as he signed me, he was like, this is really cool and everything, but this is not a book about marketing. It's a book about honesty. And I was like, oh, well, clearly I signed the only literary agent in the world who can't read, because it has nothing to do with honesty. I don't know what you're talking about. And of course, he was right and I was wrong. And as I looked at it, more, my frustrations were really born out of executives and leaders in the world putting their heads in the sands, not being honest about what was going on in the world, what was going on with the people around them, what was going on with themselves, with their own biases and self-limiting beliefs and ego. And so as I fleshed out the book more and more, it became a lot clearer that this was a bigger concept than just, being, honest about, each other. Is really, what do we believe as a society, right? Where are we trying to go? What does it mean that there's all this fake news and scandals coming out and all these documentaries on Netflix, and where are we going? So that sort of turned into my keynote and platform and really the basis of everything I do now.
So talk a little bit more to me about the literary agent thing. Now that you are on this side of things, looking back, what would you have done differently? Pursuing a traditional deal, going after a literary agent, how would you have approached that whole process differently, knowing what you know now?
Oh, I thought we only had 40 minutes. There's a lot to that one. What do I wish I had done differently? I'm very happy with my decision to go with a traditional publisher and a traditional agent. The book I submitted to my editor in the first round of editing, I was convinced was awesome. And she convinced me that it was an absolute piece of junk. And now, seeing where the book has gotten to through multiple rounds of editors and through multiple editors and all of the agent, the publishing house owner, all these people lending their perspective and eyes on it, I can't put a dollar amount on that. That was invaluable. It was much more expensive than self-publishing, right? It was much more time consuming. It was a lot more soul crushing. And I'm so glad I did it, because I would have put out essentially a piece of junk that I would have been convinced was great. And the book is my entire platform, Josh, right? I mean, you know this because you're in this business. If the book sucks and misses the mark, it really reflects badly on me, right? So I didn't go into it really thinking through that. The only reason why I went traditional in the first place was I wanted a shot at a bestseller list, right? Whether that was going to be on launch or someday, I wanted a shot at a list. And unless rules have changed, you have to be with a traditional publisher to be eligible. So that was the reason why, but it ended up being a real blessing in disguise. And I will add to that, this book is not to drive business for like my marketing agency, right? Or my tech company. It's really about keynotes. It's about having a platform so people are like, oh yeah, we need someone to speak about it. We need an expert on, honesty, right? Honesty in society, strategic honesty for results. And so I want it to be that guy. I'm not a CPA using it to drive revenue, and that's a piece of my marketing. Like, that's not what this is. I mean, I suppose it is a piece of my marketing, but in a very sort of personal way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So how did the literary agent help you, other than helping you shape the book a bit, but they connected you with the publisher? How did that process go, pitching for publishers?
Actually, fairly well. I had a couple different offers, so I was able to pick and choose. I actually turned down a couple of offers that were for more money from bigger publishing houses, because here I was creating a book about strategic honesty in business. And I felt like the big publishing houses, from everything I had learned from other authors, didn't follow any of those, best practices that I have culturally, how we treat people, how we treat employees, so on and so forth. So I actually ended up going with a smaller publisher. And I'm glad I did, because that smaller publisher was able to flex with me as things happen in life, right? And we've got deadlines, and we've got an entire book and interviewees and sign-offs and all this stuff. And so that is, I think, one of those points, Josh, that shouldn't go unsaid, is that it's not just writing a book. It's all the stuff that you don't even realize goes into a book that you don't learn until after the fact. And I certainly, was one of those people. It's like, you got to do all this stuff that has nothing to do with writing the book. So having a guide for that, both in my agent and my publisher, again, I think was invaluable.
Yeah, Ryan Holiday. And if there's anybody who could self-publish and be successful at it, it's Ryan Holiday. And yet he said he still works with publishers because it helps hold him accountable. Yeah. He says, if I didn't have the publisher giving me a deadline and a date and giving me some money and saying, you're going to have to give this back if you don't get this done, he's like, just wouldn't get it done. Yeah. So there's that. And then of course there is all that support that they can provide. So now, one of the objections people have about going with traditional publishers is that it takes a lot longer. People say, oh, it's going to take you an extra year or two to go through a traditional publisher, but if you self-publish, you can publish right now. What was that part of the experience like for you?
This book, from the time I decided I'm an author and I need a book to publishing, was 4 years. So no, it was not a fast thing.
But that wasn't all the publisher, right?
Of course not. It was not all the publisher at all. And the counterpoint to that, Josh, is that although that was a frustrating length of time, I changed over those 4 years. I changed the book and the book changed me. And I was able to meet more people and get more stories. And so over time, when I look back, thank goodness I didn't just rush through that. The timing and the types of interviews I was able to get and people and endorsements. I mean, Barbara Corker endorsing the book never happens if I hadn't taken 4 years. Sharon Lecter writing the foreword, who wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, would never have happened if it hadn't taken all that time and all the experiences I was able to have in that time. So I actually now, when people ask me like about books and putting out books, I tell them like, think of this like the slow food movement. And I want to reiterate this idea that you will edit the book and the book will edit you, truly, if you do this right. It should be I believe it should be a soul searching kind of process and one filled with a lot of self-discovery. And ultimately, I've had a lot of gratitude for that process.
Cool. I love that we're getting this contrarian viewpoint because a lot of people, they say it's the opposite, but everybody has a different experience. And I love that we're getting yours here. That's a little bit different. Now, you got to tell us the Barbara Corcoran story. How did you get her to endorse the book?
I ended up, one of those things I decided I didn't have was an MBA. So I went back to Columbia to get an MBA. And I was convinced that I needed it because I was probably stupid and there was a lot I didn't know. And boy, was I right. It's amazing what I learned through that experience. And one of the things I got to do was work on one of Barbara's companies, and meet her. And that was an incredible experience. So I was able to build that connection and then reach out and ask. She was like, yeah, sure. It was kind of simple when you're in people's networks. So yeah.
That's great. That's awesome. So you've been promoting this a lot. Let's see, what was the release date?
August 11th.
August 11th. We're recording this December 7th. So we're just talking about a few months here. And you've been really busy out promoting this during this year of COVID. So it's not like you can go around and do book signings the way that they used to do in the old days. So what has been your marketing strategy? How have you been getting the word out there?
Well, I tried it all. And you asked me like, what would I do differently? I would approach marketing and PR completely differently. I would do zero PR. I would do close to.
Now, do you just say zero PR because you tried it and it didn't work?
I'm a lot, here's the thing, Josh, like we don't want to confuse ego with results. And this is something that I've had to learn in my entrepreneurial journey and that I coach other people. I was just literally an hour ago, a panelist because I've written for Inc. and Forbes and that for a startup competition. And they're all so keen on getting press. And I had to remind them like, so some Forbes contributor writes about you. Then what? You think your phone's just going to ring off the hook because you're featured in Forbes? Doesn't exactly work that way. So, I think there's a misconception that, you have all this PR and then so all these people are like, oh my gosh, it's exactly the book I need and they buy it. Doesn't happen that way. It hasn't happened that way with other authors I've talked to or me. I had other authors say like, Peter, yeah, you do all the press you want. It's not going to really matter. And of course, me being me, I was like, well, I'm going to try it anyway, right? Because I'm an entrepreneur and I have to make mistakes for myself like an idiot. So, I got great pickups, right? I did an 8-hour satellite radio tour. I was on news stations in California and Chicago and here in the Northeast and like great stuff. Did it move the needle? I would say probably not at all, right? So I would not do that again. I would focus a lot less on any sort of like content-driven social media, that sort of stuff. Unless you're a Kardashian, people just don't care. That's what I found. And so what I would do is I would spend a lot more time developing relationships with maybe not Kim K, but some other influencers that are willing to pitch the book on my behalf. Those are the types of things that did move the needle for me. Other influencers saying, this is awesome, go buy this book. I did a ton of podcasts. How much did that move the needle? I don't know. Probably not as much as I'd like to think.
Except for this one. This one's going to blow it up.
That's right. What happened when I logged into my Amazon dashboard was they were like, who are your top people? The list was empty. Josh Steimle, the only one. It was amazing. So thank you for that. But one of the problems with books and book sales is that there's little to no visibility on tracking, right? I have no way of knowing. It took me months for Amazon to even tell me my ebook sales. Yeah. Ebook sales, Josh, that are on Amazon's platform. It's not like they don't know this data, right?
Right. So it's crazy.
The visibility is really crappy. I'll tell you probably the number 1, 2, and 3 things I would do is just go out and speak. Secure speaking gigs. I have a ton of, I've been doing a ton in Q4 here. I have a ton of speaking gigs for some great national conferences throughout 2021. Those are things where people hear you, they develop a relationship in an hour, and then they go buy the book, right? So, and by the way, I'm getting paid to pitch my book. That's awesome, right? So, but if you were listening earlier, you picked up like that was the whole point of the book, right? Not to build a marketing practice, but to go out, speak, inspire people, consult, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So you've got these different buckets. You've got your business bucket. You've got your public speaking bucket. These are all places that you can take the attention from the book, put it into that bucket, turn it into revenue. Do you have any other buckets?
Workshops. Yeah, I do corporate workshops like Vistage, EO, companies.
Okay. So a lot of the people listening to this do not have experience as a paid speaker or doing these workshops. How does one get started in that? I mean, let's say that they actually write the book and they publish the book first, and then they're saying, well, wait a second. Now, where do the speaking engagements come from? What's kind of the first step there?
It's such a chicken and the egg thing, and this is one of those things I went through when I turned 30 and figured out I hadn't done enough in my life is I just simply sat down and asked myself like, okay, if I'm the person that I think I am in my head, what are all the things that I have, right? Well, someone who's an author and a speaker, someone who gets paid to do workshops and consult, they have a website, right? They've probably gotten articles picked up in Forbes and Inc. and so on and so forth. They probably have a TEDx talk. They probably have a book, and so on and so forth. And so I literally went about assembling that jigsaw puzzle one painful step at a time. And all of the speaking opportunities I've gotten, and even the ones I'm getting now through my speaker agent, the agent I got through my network. It's all been about who do I know? How can I reach out and ask for help? How can I get introductions? I mean, over the course of the last 4 years, I'm 34 now. Josh, I've probably talked to 1,000 people on the phone, just like sending my Calendly link to anybody who would talk to me to play hopscotch to get all these relationships and put them all in place and get these pickups. And I mean, it's a lot of work. This is a lot, like writing a book has been one of the most difficult challenges I've ever faced. I've built a multi-million-dollar company, by the way, and I've also done a triple Lutz on figure skates. So I am telling you, like writing a book is really hard. And I think it should be hard. I think if it's easy, you're probably not going deep enough, getting vulnerable enough, pushing yourself outside your comfort zone enough.
We should say it's hard to write a good book.
I guess so, right? Any idiot can write a bad book. Yeah. Well, I hope this one's good. I don't know. I mean, I'm biased, so don't ask me.
Yeah. So take us through your process, your writing process. How did you start to outline this book, flesh out the ideas? A lot of people get hung up at that stage where they say, I've kind of got an idea for a thing, but now what do I do with it? Do I try to come up with a title? Do I do an outline? How do I come up with the outline? What was that process like for you?
Yeah. Okay. So 4 years, right? So I wrote and rewrote this book at least 4 times. Chapters that I had at the end ended up being at the beginning, and everything got switched around and it was divided into parts. They were the wrong parts. I redivided it into other parts. Like that all to me needed to happen in the editing process. And I feel like one mistake I probably made is I hemmed and hawed too much about those structural type things, right? I had a great editor who told me exactly how, a reader who's not in my own brain would like this to be structured. And it was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? So what I recommend to writers starting the journey is don't worry about any of that. Don't worry about making it pretty. Don't worry about the structure of it. Worry about what is the story you want to tell, right? And within that, how do you chunk it up? So like you, as in essence, want to take a reader from A to Z, right? In your book, they start out knowing nothing. You want to take them somewhere on a journey, right? What are all the checkpoints that you need to tell them? What are all the stories you want them to know? And then just take the one you're most excited about and sit down and write it. Just sit down and start writing. It doesn't matter if it's crap. It does not matter. And just keep picking at stories. And that's what I did. I kept picking at stories. And then I'd see gaps. I'd be like, ooh, I need a story about sales, like honesty in relation to sales. Where do I get that? I'm sitting on the couch watching CBS Sunday Morning, and Charlotte McCourt, an 11-year-old Girl Scout, sells 30,000 boxes of Girl Scout cookies using a brutally honest sales strategy. I was like, oh my gosh. I turned to my wife. I was like, I need that. That's my chapter, right? So, because I knew what I was looking for. Now, that raises an interest. So that ties back to my let this take time, because sometimes you don't even know what you're looking for until you're looking for it. And then try, and I failed at this, but eventually succeeded, try not to get angsty about oh, where am I going to find this? It's like anything else in life, right? Law of attraction. You just put it in your head, go about your daily business. It will come to you. And I had a lot of moments where I'd be like, I have a block. I don't know what to write about. I don't know how to finish this chapter. And eventually I would just let it go and forgive myself. I don't have it right now. It'll come to me, right? And sure enough, 5 days later, I'd, wake up at 7 a.m., be like, oh my God, I know exactly how I want to finish this. And I would sit down and do it, because I knew if I waited till 10, it would be gone, right? So part of what I learned and what I will do on the next book, if I'm that masochistic, is to just let the book come to me a little more, right? Try to take some of that pressure off.
Did you have one of these writing schedules where you woke up every morning and said, I'm going to write for an hour, or I'm going to write 2 pages? It sounds like it was more like when you got the urge, you did it.
Totally. It doesn't work for me. I'm going to sit there, I'm going to force it. Then it's forced. It's like, when you see a speaker and they've memorized every word and they're trying to remember it, it's like, what the heck is wrong with this person, right? You sense it in the communication. So I'm a big believer in let the book flow through you, and people will sense that, right? They'll sense that it's natural and passionate and all those things.
Cool. So with your publisher, did your publisher connect you with an editor for the book? Did you go out and hire an editor on your own? What was the editing process like?
They took care of all of that. They introduced me to my amazing editor, Debbie. And Debbie was very kind. I sent the first draft to her. And like I said, I was so excited. I was like, this is so awesome. I am the man. And attached to my docx. And she said, okay, I'll be back to you in 14 days. She got back to me in 10 days. She said, Peter, wow, this is really good. I just need you to rewrite chapters 2 through 11. Well, there are only 12 chapters in the whole book, Josh. So I was like, oh, okay. And she provided a really strong editorial guidance. And so I spent 2 weeks crying to myself in a corner. And then I said, okay, well, I got to figure this out. So I went about the process all over again, with her comments in mind, which were really reader driven, right? It was, what's the reader, what I said to you earlier, where's the reader at? Where are you trying to take them? What are all the checkpoints in between? I really hadn't thought about it that way, because why? We're all in our own heads, right? It's like, I already know what I know, but I, as an author, it's my responsibility to take myself back to the time before I knew and start there.
Another thing that people who are advocates of self-publishing say about traditional publishing is that you give up control. You don't get to choose the title, or you don't like the book cover, tough, because the publisher is going to decide what they like. How did you feel about the control issues with the publisher you worked with?
Well, one of the reasons why I chose an independent publisher and not a big publicly owned one is for that reason. I wanted more of a collaborative relationship. I wanted to be able to push back on things. Wiley doesn't care. They're going to be like, that's your title. And there is no back and forth. So, that was part of my strategy of selecting the right publisher. And they were very gracious. Even when my ideas were not good, they were very gentle in their reminder that they do a lot of books every year. So they probably have the right mentality. And they did.
Cool. What were some of the other benefits that you got from working with a traditional publisher? Are there any others that come to mind?
Clout. Yeah, clout. People who, and you'll have to excuse me, Josh, because I know you're a self-publishing proponent, but there are people I've met, especially other authors in the know who've done this. They'll say like, oh, did you self-publish? I'm like, no, I was published by Ben Bella. And they're like, oh, all right, cool. It's like a sort of a respect thing. It's
a little more credibility, a little more authority.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you're in the club. There's like a club of authors, right? Oh, you wrote a book? That's cool. And then there's like you got an agent, you got a publisher, all right, yeah, respect. So because of my massive ego I told you about earlier, that was important to me, and I really like that. And I knew I wanted to do more books. And I knew I wanted to do more books that could be a big book. They talk in the industry about a big book title, a big book look, right? Like going over this cover, it was like, what do big books look like? What does Start With Why look like? What did Brene Brown's book look like? All these things. What do they sound like? This is something that I think perhaps only a publisher can give you that frame of mind.
Sure. So you mentioned that you might take it upon yourself to write another book someday. Do you know what the next one's going to be about?
It's giving me heart palpitations, but I actually do know what the next one's going to be about.
Tell us about that.
It's going to be about structuring your personal life like a business does, like a business is structured. Essentially dividing your life into a sales department, a marketing department, an operations department, a customer service department, and really looking at all areas of your life and optimizing them for profit. And profit could be financial, of course, but it could also be time, it could also be passion, and it could also be family, it could be all these other things that I think many people don't intentionally design their life to maximize. I've been very excited about that topic for like 8 years. I started kind of ruminating on this because people make decisions on emotion. People make decisions on what their mother wants and their spouse wants and their kid wants and all these other things, and they get lost. And that makes me extremely sad, and that's another thing I tell folks. It's like, what are you pissed off about? What do you want to say to the world if you can grab them by the throat? That's your book, write about that, because your passion will come through on that. And that's not to say, look, I use the accounting example, right? If you're an accountant and you want to use a book for credibility and to drum up business, that is absolutely a self-published route, right? Applaud that all day long. And that doesn't mean that you just have to write a book about accounting. In fact, I would argue that the more powerful book in there is the human side of the equation. How accounting can change lives, how it does change lives, how to think with a mentality that could upend, everything you believe and change your life. And that is going to ultimately be a much more powerful and endearing and effective book, no matter whether you're self-published, regular published, whatever.
So who was the audience for Honest to Greatness, the ideal audience, the ideal reader, and how does that differ with your next book?
Yeah, so we segmented this into entrepreneurs, frontline employees, middle managers, and executives of big companies. And in part 3 of the book, I spell out how do you use strategic honesty to achieve results in your life and, of course, in business. And I actually have a chapter, for each of those. So we went in with that approach in mind, and that made it a little easier for, like, say, my podcast team to go out and find podcasts that aligned with those markets, right? So, I think the lesson in there is you had a great question. Think about your target market, write for them. The next one I want to be for everyone. It's really about life design. So whereas this was much more business focused, I want the next one to be much more like lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Now, people say, oh, if you're targeting everyone, you're really targeting no one. What's your response to that?
That's just not in books. Like I said, there's a big book, right? You look at Simon Sinek. Who does he write his books for? Leaders Eat Last and Start With Why. It's for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And interesting thing within that is publishers and agents, they have no idea what books are going to do well. Not one idea. They don't know whether a book's going to take off or not take off, or whether Snoop Dogg is going to pick it up and love it and share it with Martha Stewart and go on TV about it. Like, those things are luck, right?
They're just playing a numbers game.
They totally are, and they're going to bring on a portfolio of writers they think have a decent chance, and they're going to put their money on the roulette table, and they're going to see what happens, and hopefully one does well. This, by the way, is the same model as a venture capitalist, right? You bring on 100 companies.
Just about to say that.
95 are going to fail. One's going to become $1 billion deal, and you don't get about the ones that failed, right? So that's the mentality. And then
you only talk about the success stories, and you make yourself look smart.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah, exactly. So, I don't think it's good or bad. It's just kind of the way it is. And so, I think akin to that, if you're going to go get a publisher, you got to think about, how do you make the case that you have a good chance of getting books sold, through your social media following, through your own PR company that you own, through your, blog that you reach 1 million people through, whatever. Those platform things are important.
Mm-hmm. So how is the book done in the 3 months or so that it's been out?
I don't know. Ask me in 10 years. It's sold a couple thousand copies, and I'm getting picked up for workshops and speaking gigs and keynotes all around the country. So it's achieved its goal. Is it a New York Times bestseller? No. I know a lot of New York Times bestsellers that bought their way onto the list. I wrote a book about honesty. That wasn't really going to work too well, so I didn't do that for obvious reasons.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I know books that have sold 500,000 copies and never made it onto the New York Times bestseller list. So
exactly. So the thing is, like, what's the book going to do for you? I'm sure you talk about this to your clients all the time. It's like, what's the goal here? What are you doing this for? My goal, satisfy ego, check, right? Write a book that I think can help people. Yeah, I've seen that it's done that. And build a platform for myself to go speak and workshop, check. So yes, it's been a success.
All right, now let's talk cover design, because your book is yellow. Mm-hmm. And I happen to like the color yellow.
Thank you.
But most of the books on my shelves back there are not yellow. Why did you choose yellow?
It was down to yellow, bright green, or bright orange. I wanted it to stand out on a shelf. And actually, there are hints of green in it. But we wanted it to be in your face. Wanted to stand out. So that ruled out white, it ruled out black, it ruled out anything that. We talked about blue, true blue, honesty, but there's a lot of blue books. Blue's used an awful lot. So settled on yellow.
Got it. What were some of the other things that you learned about cover design working with your publisher?
Big title. A big book has a massive title. Like, all you see here is honest to greatness. Other things I learned about covers. My name is the same size as Barbara Corcoran's and Sharon Lecter's, right? They are the ones, when someone sees this on the shelf, they don't know who I am. They can't even pronounce my name, but they know who they are. Sharon Lecter. It's that, like Barbara Corcoran, Shark Tank star, Sharon Lecter, #1 New York Times bestselling author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That helps. So, when it comes to the cover, think in terms of credibility. Everyone, I'm sure you have a lot of listeners that have a big ego like I do. People don't know who you are. They don't know who I am. They don't know who anybody is. But they know who, some celebrities are. So work your network. Try to find someone who will write a forward for you, or give yourself an endorsement that's meaningful, and put it on your cover. That's my advice.
So we've already talked about a lot of lessons learned and tips here. Are there any other big ones that you learned on this book, that things that you're saying, for my second book, I'm not going to do that, and I will do X, Y, Z?
I think on my second book, I'm just going to do a lot less. I'll probably do podcasts, and I would direct my arrows toward speaking in workshops and really working networks. Like, I do workshops for Vistage, right, and EO. And so there are networks you can tap into that will have you come and speak and do all sorts of things. And you can exchange those services for books sold. So I've done that a little bit, hey, pay me in books. And so they'll buy 100 books or 500 books or whatever. And that's useful. But I would do a much more grassroots approach like that and just forget all the big marketing publicity, all that.
What about the actual writing of the book? What are some of the other lessons learned?
I think, now I've learned so much about structure. So, if you're a first-time author, as I said earlier, I don't recommend you even bother thinking about it. Just write what you think is, about the right direction and let an editor worry about that. But now that I've done it and I really understand structure and what the editors are looking for, I'd probably spend 80% of my time nailing down the structure, and then I would just fill it in quickly and easily, and make that the hinge point. So that's something I, of course, didn't even expect or think about going in, but I'd be much more concerned about that the other way around, because I know how editors think now.
There's another author, Josh Lerner, out there. He talks about creating a fat outline. He says you create your thin outline first, which is just your rough structure, and then you start filling it in with more details. And then you get to this fat outline that's like 50 pages of solid content. And by that point, then you can just fill in the blanks. It kind of sounds like what you're advocating is along those lines.
Again, for my second book, I will absolutely do that. For my first book, I would have lost a lot, I think, if I had done that. The free-flowing writing and telling stories actually gave me a lot of details and insights and fun that I wouldn't have done if I were so concerned about like the operational protocol of the book. Do you know what I mean? I think it loses a little bit of creativity perhaps, and sort of free-flowing, like, what do I really mean by that? And get the words from my head out, not so concerned about, how it sounds. I gained a lot from that.
Speaking of storytelling, this is one of the things that I push a lot with the writers that I'm working with is story, story, story. This is what gets people attention. What's your philosophy on story within a business book?
100%. Got to be all about story and fun stories, right? To talk about honesty, I take you back to ancient Egypt, and then we talk about ancient Rome, and we talk about scandals like Theranos and the fake #1 restaurant on TripAdvisor called The Shed, and like all these scandalous, juicy things to get people involved. Because otherwise it's just like, hey, did you know that honesty is the best policy? Well, I'm going to tell you why that's true. And it's like, oh my goodness, no, right? I don't even get to all that stuff. I really inspire in others the anger that I had by telling them the stories that fired me up, right? And now they're fired up with me, and I'm taking them on that journey. So yeah, it's critical.
Great. Well, once again, the book is Honest to Greatness by Peter Kozodoy. Where's the best place for people to find you, Peter?
Come hang out, have an honest conversation at honest2greatness.com. That's T-O, honest2greatness.com. There you can take the free 21-question honesty quiz, which will tell you your honesty profile if you're brave enough to find out. And that's a good way for you to get started in the content. And of course, pick up a copy of the book everywhere books are sold. Grab one for your colleagues at work. I do not recommend that you hand one to someone and like wink at them and like, oh, you really need this one. That does not go over well. I do not recommend that.
You got to gift it without them knowing. Slip it on their desk when they're not looking.
Exactly. Yeah. Where did this come from? I don't know.
Yeah. Hey, real quick on that quiz. Do you look at the results of those? Do people, you ever get any submissions where you're like, wow, I got to stay away from this person. This is a pathological liar here.
They are anonymous. I don't look at them. Yeah. It's just for you to get involved in how to think about, what does honesty mean? Do I even exemplify? Here's what's interesting, Josh. Everyone thinks they're honest, right? Everyone also thinks they're self-aware. Self-aware and honesty, they're those two things that everyone wants. Most think they have, and few actually possess. So take a look at the quiz and ask yourself, like, ooh, why did I get that score? That's interesting. And we'll see how open-minded you are to understanding how honest you may or may not be.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Peter.
Yeah, thanks for being honest.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.